The quietest of crafts often hold echoes of an era, don't they? Consider the Victorian umbrella repairer, a figure largely absent from grand narratives, yet essential to daily life. Between roughly 1820 and 1914, Britain was undergoing immense change, industrialization reshaping society, its empire expanding globally, and Queen Victoria presiding over it all. This period saw rapid growth and wealth, but also significant disparities in living conditions. And amidst this upheaval, someone had to mend the rain gear. The Victorian era, as Britannica notes, was marked by a class-based society and distinct gender roles. While grand narratives focus on industrialists or politicians, the umbrella repairer occupied a space between these worlds, often working class, but providing a service valued across social strata. An umbrella wasn't merely an accessory, it offered protection from the famously unpredictable British weather. And when those umbrellas broke, a snapped spoke, torn fabric they needed mending. Imagine a small workshop tucked away on a bustling London street. The air thick with the scent of oiled canvas and beeswax. A craftsman meticulously restitching a silk canopy or carefully shaping a new wooden handle. It's easy to overlook such work when considering an age defined by steam engines and sprawling factories, but these small repairs were vital threads in the fabric of Victorian life. Evidence suggests that many working-class families struggled with basic necessities, yet even they valued keeping their umbrellas functional. What did this all mean for those who kept the rain off people's heads? The mechanics of this trade are surprisingly difficult to trace precisely. Unlike some crafts with guild records or apprenticeship documentation, umbrella repair seems to have been largely informal. However, advertisements from the period offer glimpses into the nature of the work and its clientele. One such advertisement simply stated, "Umbrellas repaired, silk recovering a speciality." Others listed more specific services like handle replacement or spoke realignment. These ads often appeared alongside those for bootmakers and tailors, suggesting that umbrella repairers frequently combined their skills with other garment-related trades. The sheer volume of umbrellas in circulation meant there was consistent demand. Britannia's account highlights Britain's status as a dominant global empire, a vast network requiring protection from the elements. And when those umbrellas broke, someone needed to fix them. Britannica notes that during this period, Britain became the world's first industrialized nation, leading to unprecedented wealth and imperial expansion. However, this progress came at a cost. Long hours, dangerous conditions, and low wages for many workers. These realities fueled the rise of trade unions and contributed to social change. The Victorian era also saw advancements in science and significant political developments, including expanding voting rights. Britannica describes a society shaped by class distinctions, with most people belonging to the working class, while a growing middle. Gender roles were rigidly defined, assigning distinct expectations for men and women. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, was a period of profound transformation for Britain. It coincides largely with Queen Victoria's reign, and it's a time indelibly linked in our minds with images of rigid social structures and elaborate mourning rituals. But beneath the surface of those familiar tropes lay a nation undergoing seismic shifts, driven by industrialization, urbanization, and an expanding electorate. Britannica tells us that Britain became the world's first industrialized nation during this period, bringing unprecedented. The scale of change is difficult to grasp today. Consider what was happening. Factories replaced traditional workshops, drawing rural populations into burgeoning cities in search of work. This rapid urbanization led to overcrowded conditions and often harsh living standards, a stark contrast to the growing prosperity enjoyed by some. Alongside this upheaval came significant political developments. Voting rights were gradually extended, though initially only to a small portion of the male population. And while Britain held sway over a vast empire, its internal landscape was being reshaped by social movements and intellectual debates. Yet, amidst these sweeping changes, craftsmanship persisted. While mass production began to dominate certain industries, skilled artisans continued to ply their trades, repairing shoes, tailoring clothes, and yes, mending umbrellas. It's easy to imagine a world where everything is disposable, isn't it? But in Victorian Britain, repair was often the more economical, even the preferred option. This created opportunities for those with nimble fingers and a keen eye like the umbrella repairer we will be focusing on shortly. The expansion of the franchise, while significant, wasn't the whole story either. Political participation took many forms. Demonstrations, petitions, and pamphlets all served as avenues for voicing concerns, even for those denied a vote. And Britain's reach extended far beyond its shores, shaping an empire that touched countless lives across the globe. The nature of this imperial relationship was complex, with varied forms of rule and influence depending on the region. People from Britain sought opportunities abroad, in civil service, military roles, missionary work, and contributing to infrastructure projects. Simultaneously, goods and people flowed between Britain and its colonies in a constant, intricate exchange. This interconnectedness profoundly shaped both the empire and the nation. The sheer scale of this global presence is difficult to fully grasp today, but it contributed significantly to Britain's wealth and standing on the world stage. The Victorian era, stretching roughly from 1820 to 1914, saw Britain rise as a dominant global power. It was an age of industrialization and expanding empire, but also one defined by rigid social structures and distinct gender roles. While grand narratives often focus on the sprawling reach of the British Empire or the innovations of industry, quieter stories existed too. Tales of everyday lives lived within its borders. And among those, a small corner in Slovenia holds a unique place. Marija La's umbrella repair shop. Nestled in a quiet Ljubljana neighborhood, Marija's workshop isn't a relic of the past, but a living testament to enduring craft and sustainable practice. It's not easily missed. The scent of oiled canvas and beeswax hangs gently in the air, a comforting aroma that speaks of careful work and patient hands. The shop itself is small, just large enough for Marija and her workbench, crammed with tools, needles, thread, patches of fabric, and carefully sorted umbrella ribs. Sunlight streams through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing above displays of repaired umbrellas, each one a story in its own right. Marija doesn't sell new umbrellas, she mends them. In an age increasingly dominated by disposable goods, her business stands as a deliberate counterpoint, a quiet rebellion against planned obsolescence. It's a practice that resonates with a growing awareness of waste and the value of preserving what already exists. You might wonder, in a world of cheap imports, can such a trade truly thrive? And yet Marija's shop does more than simply repair umbrellas. It embodies a philosophy, a commitment to traditional skills and mindful consumption. But Marija's work extends beyond simply mending broken umbrellas. She actively cultivates an appreciation for traditional skills within her community. She frequently hosts small workshops, teaching basic repair techniques to anyone interested, children and adults alike. These aren't formal lessons, more like demonstrations where participants can try their hand at patching a tear or replacing a spoke. It's a way of passing on knowledge that might otherwise be lost, ensuring these skills don't simply fade with the decline of mass production. The simple act of learning to mend something oneself fosters a deeper connection to objects and encourages mindful consumption, a direct counterpoint to the throwaway culture so prevalent elsewhere. And perhaps more subtly, Marija's shop serves as a quiet space for conversation. Neighbors stop in not just for repairs, but also for a chat, sharing stories and building connections within their community. The skills Marija demonstrates in her shop, the meticulous repair of umbrellas, represent something more than just a practical craft. They speak to a broader historical shift, a tension between industrial production and enduring artisanal traditions. Consider for a moment what it meant to own an umbrella during much of the Victorian era. These weren't mass-produced, disposable items. They were investments, often beautifully crafted objects made with quality materials, intended to last. The Britannica notes that Britain experienced rapid growth and industrialization during this period, becoming a wealthy nation. Yet, alongside this progress came harsh realities for many workers. The factory system replaced domestic production, leading to long hours and low wages. An umbrella, then, might be the only item of significant personal value a person owned, something worth mending rather than replacing. This wasn't simply about frugality, it was often necessity. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, saw Britain as a dominant global empire and a society rigidly structured by class. While the wealthy could readily discard damaged goods and purchase new ones, for many others, repair was essential. The very act of maintaining something, be it clothing, furniture, or an umbrella, became a quiet form of resistance against a system that prioritized disposability. It's a subtle point, perhaps, but one that speaks volumes about the lived experience of so many during this time. And as industrial methods improved and mass production took hold, skills like these began to fade, becoming less common knowledge. This fading of specialized skills wasn't unique to umbrella repair, of course. It mirrored broader shifts across numerous trades. The Britannica notes that Britain experienced rapid growth and industrialization during this period, becoming a wealthy nation, but that wealth didn't always translate into equitable circumstances for everyone. As factory production became more commonplace, the demand for hand craftsmanship diminished, pushing artisans like umbrella repairers to adapt or face obsolescence. Yet, even as these skills waned in Britain, they persisted elsewhere. Consider Slovenia, a nation geographically distant from Victorian England, but facing similar pressures of industrial change and cultural preservation. There, too, traditional crafts have held a quiet significance, particularly in maintaining objects valued for their quality and longevity. While the specifics differ, Slovenian umbrellas might be constructed with distinct regional materials or techniques, the underlying principle remains: repair as an act of respect for both the object itself and the knowledge embedded within its creation. The very notion of discarding something that could be restored seems almost counterintuitive in a culture where resourcefulness is prized and where connection to heritage is actively cultivated. It prompts one to wonder if there's a broader lesson here about valuing skill over speed, durability over disposability. The objects we've been discussing, these carefully repaired umbrellas, offer a glimpse into a world often obscured by broader narratives of industrial progress and societal upheaval. To truly understand their significance, it's helpful to consider the context in which they existed: Victorian England. Between roughly 1820 and 1914, this nation was undergoing profound transformation. It held significant global power as the world's largest empire, yet within its borders, a rigid class system dictated daily life. The era witnessed rapid industrialization. Britain became the first industrialized nation, bringing unprecedented wealth, but also creating harsh working conditions for many. As Britannica notes, factory work replaced traditional production, leading to long hours and low wages, realities particularly acute for women and children. Alongside this economic shift came a complex interplay of social codes and cultural changes. A strict moral code prevailed, though it was often contradicted by the lived experiences of ordinary people. Gender roles were sharply defined. Men occupied the public sphere of work and politics, while women were largely confined to the domestic realm. Class dictated everything from income and occupation to leisure activities and even political participation. It's a world that can feel distant, almost alien, but it's precisely within this framework that the quiet act of umbrella repair finds its resonance. The expansion of the franchise, for instance, is a key element to understanding this era's complexities. Initially, voting rights were limited to property-owning men, roughly 500,000 people within a population of 21 million. Subsequent reforms gradually broadened participation. In 1829, Catholic men gained suffrage, followed by most middle-class men in 1832. Further extensions occurred in 1867 and 1884, bringing working-class men into the electorate. Full adult suffrage, removing property requirements altogether, wasn't achieved until 1928. But political engagement extended beyond simply casting a ballot. Demonstrations, petitions, and pamphlets provided avenues for those excluded from formal politics to voice their concerns, a vital counterpoint to official narratives. And it's important to remember that Britain's reach was global. The Victorian British Empire dominated much of the world, though its methods varied considerably depending on the region. Civil service roles, missionary work, and infrastructure projects linked Britain to its colonies in intricate ways. People from across the empire traveled between Britain and its territories, creating a constant flow of goods and individuals. This exchange shaped both the nation and its far-flung holdings. It's difficult to imagine one without the other. The sheer scale of this imperial project is staggering when considered alongside the quiet industry of an umbrella repairer in London, two seemingly disparate facets of Victorian life, inextricably linked by a shared historical context. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, was a period of immense change for Britain. It's often portrayed with certain expectations, perhaps images of rigid morality and societal constraints. And while those perceptions hold some truth, they only tell part of the story. This was also an age of unprecedented industrial growth, transforming not just factories and railways, but the very fabric of daily life. Consider for a moment the quiet work of an umbrella repairer in London, seemingly untouched by these grand shifts. Yet even he wasn't immune to their impact. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally reshaped Britain's economy and social structure. What was once largely produced within homes or small workshops gradually shifted to large-scale factories. This transition had a profound effect on traditional crafts, including the repair of everyday items like umbrellas. Before this period, skilled artisans often held considerable sway in their communities. They were masters of their trade, passing down knowledge and techniques through generations. But as mass production began to take hold, the demand for bespoke repairs diminished. Why pay a craftsman's price when a new umbrella could be purchased relatively cheaply? The shift wasn't immediate, of course. For a time, repairers like our London artisan likely continued their work, catering to those who valued quality and longevity over mere cost. But the underlying trend was undeniable. Britain was becoming a nation defined by its industrial prowess, where efficiency and affordability often trumped traditional craftsmanship. The sheer scale of this transformation is difficult to grasp when considering the quiet industry of an umbrella repairer. Two seemingly disparate facets of Victorian life, inextricably linked by a shared historical context. This shift wasn't solely about cost, though that certainly played a role. The very nature of umbrella construction was changing. Early Victorian umbrellas often involved intricate hand-sewing of silk or other fine fabrics stretched over whalebone. As the era progressed, manufacturers began experimenting with new materials like cotton drill and eventually waterproofed canvas, alongside more readily available woods for framing. These changes lent themselves to mechanized production. Machines could cut fabric faster, assemble frames with greater speed, and even apply waterproofing treatments on a scale impossible for individual artisans. The result was an umbrella that, while perhaps less elegant than its handcrafted predecessor, could be produced far more cheaply and in significantly larger quantities. It's easy to imagine the London repairer noticing this trend, fewer customers seeking bespoke alterations, more bringing in mass production. And even those repairs were increasingly standardized, requiring less individual ingenuity and more adherence to factory specifications. The shift towards mass production, as we've discussed, undeniably altered the landscape for London's umbrella repairers. But it also coincided with a period where umbrellas themselves became increasingly integrated into Victorian life and imbued with meaning beyond simple protection from the rain. Initially viewed with suspicion and even ridicule, they gradually ascended to become commonplace accessories, reflecting social standing and evolving fashion trends. Early adopters of the umbrella in Britain faced considerable derision. Jonas Hanway, for instance, famously endured public mockery when he began regularly carrying one in London during the 1750s. People considered it effeminate for a man. Yet, by the mid-19th century, roughly coinciding with Queen Victoria's reign, umbrellas were ubiquitous on British streets. They weren't just functional objects anymore, they had become statements. The quality of an umbrella signaled wealth and taste. A gentleman might invest in a sturdy whalebone frame and fine silk covering, while a working man would likely make do with a more basic construction. The materials themselves contributed to this social signaling. Elaborate handles crafted from ivory, silver, or exotic woods were hallmarks of the upper classes. Even the color of an umbrella could convey information, darker shades often associated with mourning or formality, brighter colors suggesting a more cheerful disposition. And as fashion changed, so too did umbrellas, their shapes and styles mirroring contemporary trends in clothing and accessories. You might observe a lady's parasol echoing the silhouette of her gown, or a gentleman's umbrella reflecting the cut of his coat. The increasing accessibility of umbrellas also reflected broader shifts within Victoria. As William Sangston noted, early examples were luxury items, but improvements in manufacturing techniques gradually lowered their cost. This meant that a wider range of people could afford to own one, though, naturally, the quality still varied considerably. A working man's umbrella might be made with a simple wooden handle and a less durable fabric covering, while those higher up the social ladder continued to favor more elaborate designs. The proliferation of umbrellas also spurred innovation in related industries. Consider the rise of specialized shops catering to their sale and repair, establishments like the one we've been exploring. These businesses not only provided essential services, but also served as local hubs for fashion trends, displaying new styles and materials. And it's interesting to observe how the very act of carrying an umbrella became integrated into social rituals. A subtle signal of respectability, or even a means of navigating crowded streets with a degree of formality. The umbrella repairer's shop reflected broader shifts within Victorian society, and those weren't always about grand political movements or sweeping technological change. Sometimes they were revealed in everyday objects, like umbrellas, and how people acquired them. Alongside bespoke tailoring and elaborate furnishings, a market emerged for mass-produced goods, even something as personal as an umbrella. This rise of consumer culture found its voice in pamphlet small, often cheaply printed booklets circulating widely throughout Victorian Britain. They tackled issues directly affecting working people, labor conditions, the widening gap between rich and poor, and increasingly the availability and affordability of goods like umbrellas. These pamphlets offered a direct line to concerns rarely reflected in formal publications. The disparity in quality was a recurring theme. While some could afford umbrellas with silk coverings and ornate handles, as evidenced by examples found even in a coastal town like Whitby, many others relied on simpler versions made from cotton or less durable fabrics. Advertisements reveal this tiered system. Shops routinely touted homemade umbrellas alongside more luxurious options, acknowledging that affordability was paramount for many customers. The pamphlets often served as platforms for labor activists and social reformers. They detailed harsh realities of factory work, long hours, dangerous conditions, and questioned why so many struggled to afford basic necessities while others displayed wealth. Arguments advocated for fair wages or improved working environments. Sometimes these pamphlets offered practical advice: how to mend clothes, bargain at the market, and even repair an umbrella yourself, extending its lifespan and saving money. Advertisements also reveal something about umbrella ownership. Shops routinely offered repair services, acknowledging that umbrellas weren't disposable items. Worn fabric could be replaced, handles reattached or swapped for a more fashionable style. It was often cheaper than buying new. One Whitby firm, W. Thornton, specifically advertised homemade umbrellas alongside other options, suggesting both Crawford & Co., a London manufacturer with an address at 28 Cheapside, marked some umbrellas found in Whitby, indicating that even coastal towns received goods from larger urban centres. The Whitby Museum holds a few examples dating before 1914, though it's likely many more simply wore out and were discarded. Less prized as fashion statements than parasols, perhaps. The shift towards mass production began to subtly reshape lives, even those seemingly untouched by factories and mills. Consider the humble umbrella, once a carefully crafted item, reliant on skilled hands for its creation and upkeep.
As we've seen, advertisements in Whitby acknowledged repair services as commonplace. Umbrellas weren't disposable then, but that was changing. The Victorian era, spanning roughly 1820 to 1914, witnessed Britain transform into the world's largest empire, a period of rapid industrialization and economic growth, though this progress wasn't universally shared. The rise of factories fundamentally altered how goods were made. What had previously been done by hand, sewing fabric, shaping handles, assembling frames, was increasingly performed by machines in large workshops. This meant fewer opportunities for independent artisans like umbrella repairers.
The Britannica notes that the Industrial Revolution led to long hours and dangerous conditions for many workers as traditional domestic production gave way to factory systems. While this wasn't unique to umbrella making, it illustrates a broader trend. Skills honed over years were suddenly less valuable in a world prioritizing speed and quantity. The expansion of the electorate during this period also reflects these societal shifts. Voting rights gradually extended beyond property owners, signaling a broadening participation in governance, though not without its own complexities. And as Britain's empire expanded, so too did the flow of goods, often manufactured on an industrial scale, impacting local economies and traditional crafts like umbrella repair. It's easy to imagine a time when a skilled craftsman held considerable sway within his community. What happens when cheaper, mass-produced alternatives become readily available? This shift towards mass production wasn't simply about cheaper umbrellas. It reflected broader changes in how people perceived value and skill. The Britannica notes that Victorian society itself was organized hierarchically, with class playing a significant role in determining status. A skilled umbrella repairer, once perhaps respected within his local community for the quality of his work, found himself competing against goods produced on an industrial scale, items often cheaper but lacking the personalized touch and durability of handcrafted wares. The expansion of the electorate during this period also signaled evolving social dynamics. As more people gained a voice in governance, so too did consumer preferences begin to shift towards readily available, affordable options. Indeed, Britain's imperial reach further complicated matters. As the Britannica observes, the flow of goods between Britain and its colonies, imported fabrics and materials, often produced at lower costs elsewhere, undercut local suppliers, making it increasingly difficult for independent artisans to compete. One might wonder if this influx of cheaper alternatives contributed to a gradual devaluation of traditional skills, not just in umbrella repair, but across numerous crafts. The expansion of readily available, affordable goods and shifting consumer preferences certainly complicated life for those who relied on traditional skills, and that included umbrella repairers. But before we consider how Marie Jalal navigated this changing landscape, let's look back at the legacy she inherited, a family history deeply intertwined with the craft. Marija's father, Stefan La, wasn't the first in his line to mend broken ribs and replace worn silk. His own father, Jan, had learned the trade from his uncle, a man who, according to local records, was already repairing umbrellas in Krakow as early as the 1840s. It seems that for generations the La men, and increasingly women too, had possessed a quiet expertise in keeping these essential accessories functional and presentable. This wasn't simply about fixing tiers or reattaching handles. It involved an understanding of materials, the properties of different woods for frames, the nuances of silk and other fabrics used for canopies, and a practiced hand capable of recreating complex structures. Jan La's workshop, like those of many artisans, was more than just a place of work. It served as a hub within the community, a space where neighbors would gather not only to have their umbrellas mended, but also to exchange news and share stories. Stefan, following in his father's footsteps, continued this tradition, passing on his knowledge to Marija from a young age. She'd sit beside him, watching intently as he patiently restored damaged umbrellas, learning the delicate art of pattern matching and the importance of precision. You might imagine it was a quiet apprenticeship. The sounds would have been mostly the gentle scrape of tools against wood or fabric, punctuated by Stefan's occasional instructions. Stefan's dedication to his craft extended beyond simply maintaining umbrellas. He also sought out unusual materials and experimented with new techniques, often incorporating them into repairs or even creating entirely bespoke pieces for wealthier clients. Marija absorbed these lessons too, developing a keen eye for detail. She would meticulously catalogue scraps of fabric, noting their texture, weight, and dye, a habit that reflected her father's own methodical approach to his work. It's said he kept notebooks filled with sketches of frame designs and notes on the properties of different woods, resources she later inherited. These weren't just practical guides, they were testaments to a lifelong pursuit of excellence in a trade often overlooked. The La workshop, then, became a repository not only for broken umbrellas, but also for knowledge passed down through generations, a tangible link to Krakow's history and the quiet dignity of skilled labor. Marija La's workshop, as we've heard, was more than just a place to mend umbrellas. It held generations of knowledge. And within that accumulated wisdom lay an unspoken understanding of resourcefulness, a quiet ethos that resonates even today. The Victorian era itself, spanning from 1820 to 1914, was marked by rapid industrialization and expansion of the British Empire. Yet, alongside this growth existed a growing awareness of its costs. Consider the sheer volume of goods consumed during this period. Britain became a wealthy nation, but that wealth wasn't evenly distributed. While some enjoyed unprecedented prosperity, many others endured harsh conditions. And everything from clothing to household items was often treated with a degree of disposability we might find shocking now. But within that context, the simple act of repairing an umbrella, extending its life rather than discarding it for something new, represented a subtle form of resistance. Marija's meticulous cataloging of fabric scraps wasn't simply about efficiency, it was a reflection of this broader sensibility. She noted texture and weight, dye essentially assessing each piece for potential reuse. It's easy to imagine her father, the previous generation, doing something similar with wood samples, carefully evaluating their strength and suitability for different frame designs. This wasn't just practical, it embodied a respect for materials that feels remarkably modern. You might wonder, in an age of mass production, why such care was taken. Perhaps it was simply ingrained a recognition that resources were finite even then. This respect for materials also extended to Marija's understanding of dyes and their longevity. She kept meticulous records, not just of fabric type, but of dye sources, noting whether a particular shade came from imported cochineal or locally sourced madder root, for example. Some dyes proved far more resistant to fading than others, an observation that informed her choices when matching repairs. It's likely she would have discussed these nuances with customers, explaining why certain fabrics were better suited to specific applications and offering advice on care, a level of personalized service uncommon in a rapidly changing commercial landscape. And it wasn't solely about the materials themselves. Marija also valued the skills involved in their original manufacture. She recognized that hand-woven wools, for instance, possessed qualities difficult to replicate with machine-produced cloth. While she undoubtedly repaired items made from both, her notes suggest a preference, and perhaps a greater appreciation, for those crafted by skilled artisans. This wasn't simply nostalgia, it was an acknowledgement of the inherent durability often found in traditionally produced goods, a quality that aligned perfectly with her repair ethos. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, was a period of immense change, a time when Britain held significant global power as the world's largest empire. It's easy to picture this age through romanticized notions of propriety and rigid social structures, but beneath that surface lay a vibrant discourse shaping public opinion on issues we still grapple with today. And much of that conversation unfolded within the pages of periodicals, magazines and journals that served as vital forums for debate. These weren't simply news repositories, they were spaces where writers explored pressing concerns like labor rights, class mobility, and even industrialization's impact upon the environment. During Queen Victoria's reign, these periodicals offered platforms to challenge, or at least examine norms. An article dissecting the growth of literacy and printing technology fueled this explosion of periodical publishing. As Britain industrialized, replacing domestic production with factories, understanding and debating the consequences grew correspondingly. The expansion of the electorate also played a role. As more people gained the right to vote, they sought information beyond official pronouncements. These periodicals weren't solely spaces for intellectual exploration, they reflected, and sometimes amplified, anxieties about rapid social change. A wide range of voices could be heard, from academics to enthusiasts, contributing to a lively public sphere. Consider the debates surrounding factory reform. Some articles championed technological progress, while others detailed appalling working conditions, particularly for women and children. These accounts frequently employed statistical data or observational narratives to illustrate the human cost of unchecked industrial growth. A meticulously researched article on child labor alongside an advertisement for a new steam engine. The expansion of literacy also meant periodicals catered to increasingly diverse audiences. While some journals remained within the educated elite's domain, others sought broader readership with shorter articles and accessible language. This democratization wasn't. Naturally, perspectives varied depending on a publication's intended audience and political leanings. A periodical aimed at factory owners might present a very different picture of industrial life than one geared towards working-class families. The sheer variety underscores how complex public discourse truly was, a mix of progress and concern, optimism and apprehension. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, witnessed a remarkable surge in industrialization and imperial power. For Britain, a period marked by both immense wealth and stark social disparities. We've explored. But what about the quieter trades? The ones that persisted even as mass production threatened to eclipse them? Consider, for instance, the humble umbrella repairer. The very nature of Victorian society, its class structure, its emphasis on gender roles, influenced how these skills were valued and passed down. Britannica notes a rigid class system where working-class families often faced harsh conditions, while the middle and upper classes held considerable power. Yet even within this hierarchy, there was room for specialized crafts like umbrella repair. These weren't glamorous professions, they represented a connection to an older way of doing things, a tangible link to craftsmanship in a rapidly changing world. And that connection hasn't entirely vanished. Centuries later, across Europe, the echoes of Victorian-era trades can still be heard, or rather, felt, in unexpected places. In Slovenia, for example, a small but dedicated community continues the tradition of umbrella repair. It's a fascinating parallel, a craft once vital in Britain, now finding renewed purpose far from its origins. How did this happen? Why has this seemingly minor skill endured across such vast distances and time? This persistence isn't merely sentimental, it speaks to something deeper about human connection to craft and tradition. The Slovenian umbrella repairers, for instance, often learned their skills from family members' fathers, grandfathers, even great-grandfathers, passing down techniques honed over generations. It's a lineage that stretches back, in some cases, surprisingly close to the Victorian era itself. While the specifics of their methods may have adapted to local materials and preferences, the fundamental principles remain remarkably similar: careful assessment of damage, meticulous reweaving of fabric, precise replacement of spokes and ribs. One can imagine the quiet satisfaction, the almost meditative quality of such work. It's a tangible link across continents and decades, demonstrating that certain skills possess. The repairer isn't simply fixing an umbrella. They are preserving a piece of history, upholding a standard of craftsmanship often lost in mass-produced goods. And perhaps, too, there is a quiet resistance at play, a deliberate choice to maintain something handmade and personal in a world increasingly dominated by the impersonal. The meticulous work of an umbrella repairer, as we've explored, speaks to a dedication beyond mere functionality. But how did these objects, these carefully constructed shelters from rain and sun, come to be so ubiquitous in Victorian society? The answer lies, at least partly, within the burgeoning world of advertising and consumer culture that defined the era. The period between 1820 and 1914 witnessed a profound shift in how goods were presented and sold. Britain's status as a dominant global empire fueled industrialization and wealth, but also created a society increasingly shaped by class distinctions and evolving gender roles. As Britannica notes, this was an age where businesses actively sought to influence consumer behavior, a relatively new phenomenon compared to earlier times. While the specifics of advertising methods varied, its underlying purpose remained constant: to create desire. Early advertisements weren't quite like what we might expect today. Elaborate imagery and catchy slogans were less common. Instead, they appeared in newspapers and trade journals, often consisting of simple text describing a product's qualities or listing prices. Consider the umbrella itself. A repairer's skill implied an underlying quality in the original manufacture, something advertisements sought to emulate. These notices might highlight durability, craftsmanship, or affordability qualities that resonated with a population increasingly concerned about value and status. The growth of the middle class, as Britannica details, meant more people had disposable income and were eager to signal their position through carefully chosen purchases. An umbrella, particularly a These early advertisements often lacked visual appeal, but they did reveal something about the values of the time. Consider what was being emphasized: longevity, reliability, qualities that spoke to a population wary of rapid industrial change and eager for stability. The burgeoning railway network also played a role. Notices advertising goods began appearing on station platforms and in waiting rooms, extending their reach beyond traditional newspaper readership. This marked a shift towards targeting consumers directly rather than simply informing existing markets. The rise of illustrated catalogs further transformed the landscape. Firms like Harrods began producing lavishly detailed catalogs, showcasing an array of products, from clothing to furniture, and reaching potential customers far beyond London's immediate vicinity. While these were not strictly advertisements in the modern sense, they served a similar purpose: stimulating desire and presenting goods as aspirational objects. One can imagine a rural family poring over such a catalogue, dreaming of owning an item previously unimaginable. It's worth noting that even with this increased exposure, advertising remained largely text-based. Photography was still developing, and its widespread use in commercial promotion would take time. The focus remained on conveying information and subtly shaping perceptions through carefully chosen words. The rise of umbrella repairers like Marija La wasn't solely about mending broken frames or replacing worn fabric. It was a quiet thread woven into the lives of London's inhabitants. Consider this: in an era before mass production and disposable goods, an umbrella represented a significant investment. To lose one felt like losing more than just shelter from the rain. And that's where figures like Marija stepped in, offering not merely a service but a connection to something valued. The evidence suggests these repairers were surprisingly ubiquitous. One account describes them as emerging from some malodorous alley, hardly glamorous locations, yet they possessed an almost uncanny ability to predict the weather. They'd appear with their wares just as the first drops began to fall, ready to offer a temporary refuge from the storm. But beyond these opportunistic sales lay a deeper trade, the restoration of cherished possessions. Imagine a woman returning to Marija's shop, not simply because her umbrella was broken, but because it had accompanied her on countless walks, shielded her children, or perhaps even witnessed a proposal of marriage. Danica Turcon might have brought in an umbrella with a faded floral pattern, its handle worn smooth from years of use. Perhaps Katya Buda's bore the faint scent of lavender and memories of seaside holidays. These weren't just objects, they were vessels of personal history. And Marija, through her skilled hands, was entrusted with preserving those stories, stitching a tear, reinforcing a weakened rib, breathing new life into something that held profound sentimental value. It's a far cry from the modern impulse to discard and replace, isn't it? The evidence suggests umbrella repairers weren't merely menders of fabric and bone, but repositories of a wider social network, a mobile confessional, if you will. One account describes them as emerging from back alleys, their voices vocal as their saltatory prototypes, ready to dispense shelter at any price. They bought old umbrellas for sixpence, sometimes trading parasols in return. A man repairing an umbrella spoke of his experiences. He'd been a prisoner of war, forced to work for the French, and later marched to France. Free trade in umbrellas and free trade in bread, he remarked, a sentiment suggesting disruption of the familiar order. The repaired umbrella, once returned to its owner, would undoubtedly shield them from rain, but it also served as a quiet testament to resilience, a tangible link to a past weathered by hardship and change. The umbrella repairer's story, that quiet observation about free trade and bread, hints at something larger than just a mended canopy. It speaks to the material world of Victorian Britain, a world shaped by industry, class, and an ever-expanding reach across the globe. Imagine, if you will, not grand palaces or sweeping landscapes, but the everyday objects that filled homes and pockets, dictated routines, and reflected the era's profound changes. Britain during this period, roughly 1820 to 1914, was becoming a dominant global power, an empire built on trade and industry. This wealth didn't distribute evenly, it fostered a society rigidly divided by class. Most people belonged to the working class, enduring long hours for low wages in often harsh conditions. Yet, even within those constraints, life revolved around tangible things: sturdy boots for factory work, simple crockery for meals, and yes, an umbrella, perhaps mended more than once, to shield against unpredictable weather. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally reshaped daily existence. Traditional methods of production gave way to factories, bringing both opportunity and hardship. While some families could afford basic necessities and even a little leisure, others struggled just to survive. The middle class grew significantly, embracing values of respectability and striving for upward mobility. They furnished their homes with increasingly elaborate goods: gas lighting, patterned wallpaper, mass-produced furniture, symbols of their rising status. Even the monarchy itself underwent transformation, evolving into a more ceremonial role amidst these social shifts. The growth of the state itself is reflected in other areas too. Consider, for instance, the birth. Initially, a privilege reserved for the wealthy and official correspondence. It gradually expanded to encompass personal letters carried across vast distances. This facilitated communication between families separated by migration or work, knitting together an increasingly mobile population. Alongside this came improvements in transportation. Railways crisscrossed the nation, shrinking perceived distances and accelerating the pace of life. These networks demanded new infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, signal boxes, all contributing to a landscape irrevocably altered by industrial progress. The rise in popularity of photography, for example, speaks to a desire for both documentation and self-representation. Portraits became accessible to those beyond the aristocracy, offering a tangible record of one's place within society. And what of toys? From intricately crafted wooden dolls' houses, mirroring fashionable homes to simple hoops and balls, they provided children with miniature versions of their world, reinforcing social roles and aspirations. The rapid changes brought about by industrialization weren't solely about factories and railways, though those certainly reshaped the landscape. They also prompted a growing awareness of their consequences, an emerging. It wasn't quite the same as modern sustainability efforts, but it represented a shift nonetheless. The sheer scale of industrial production began to draw attention to its impact. Britain had become, as Britannica notes, the world's first industrialized nation, and that came at a cost. The air in cities grew thick with coal smoke. Rivers became open sewers carrying waste from factories and homes alike. One might ask, was this progress if it meant sacrificing the very elements upon which life depended? While not universally shared, anxieties about these changes began to surface in public discourse. Pamphlets and periodicals, those increasingly accessible avenues for sharing ideas, started documenting these observations. They weren't necessarily advocating for sweeping reforms, rather they reflected a growing unease with the visible degradation of the environment. The focus wasn't on global warming or climate change as we understand them now, but on more immediate concerns: polluted water sources, respiratory illnesses linked to smog, and the loss of green spaces within rapidly expanding urban areas. These anxieties were interwoven with broader social commentary. The same periodicals that championed industrial innovation also occasionally voiced reservations about its These early expressions of concern weren't always articulated with scientific precision, naturally. Observations about polluted rivers often linked them to outbreaks of disease, a direct and understandable connection for those experiencing it firsthand. One periodical, The Builder, typically focused on architecture and construction, nevertheless published articles detailing the unsanitary conditions prevalent in rapidly expanding industrial towns. It wasn't solely an academic or philosophical exercise. These were practical concerns affecting public health and, by extension, economic productivity. Indeed, anxieties about the environment frequently intersected with social reform movements. The appalling living conditions of the working class, often exacerbated by pollution, became a focal point for reformers advocating for improved sanitation and housing. While the primary motivation might have been to alleviate poverty or improve worker efficiency, it also acknowledged the detrimental impact of environmental degradation on human well-being. Some writers began questioning whether unchecked industrial growth could truly be considered progress if it simultaneously undermined the health and vitality of the population. It's a question that resonates even now. The emerging awareness wasn't about preserving pristine wilderness. Such concepts were less prevalent then, but rather about mitigating the immediate visible harms caused by human activity. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, was a period of immense change for Britain. It witnessed rapid industrialization and the expansion of its empire, transforming the nation into a global power. Yet, this progress wasn't universally shared. Vast disparities existed across social strata. While some enjoyed unprecedented wealth, many others endured harsh conditions, a reality that would profoundly impact traditional crafts like umbrella. Marija Lar's skill in mending umbrellas was rooted in techniques passed down through generations, but the very forces driving Britain's prosperity also posed a significant challenge to her livelihood and those of artisans like her. The Industrial Revolution, while generating wealth, fundamentally altered production methods. Factories began churning out mass-produced goods at prices that undercut individual craftspeople. Suddenly, an umbrella wasn't just a carefully constructed item, it was something readily available, often cheaply made, and easily replaced. Consider the implications. Why invest in repairing a damaged umbrella when a new one could be purchased for a relatively small sum? This shift in consumer habits, prioritizing affordability over durability and artistry, created an environment where traditional skills were increasingly devalued. The rigid class structure of Victorian society further complicated matters. Artisans often found themselves struggling to compete with the lower prices offered by factories, while also facing pressure from a middle class that prioritized novelty and convenience. It wasn't simply about skill versus speed, it was about navigating a system fundamentally reshaped by industrial might. This devaluation wasn't solely an economic matter, it represented a shift in values too. The meticulous craftsmanship inherent in umbrella repair, the careful selection of materials, the precise stitching, the understanding of mechanics, stood in stark contrast to the disposable nature of mass-produced goods. Consider that Marija Lar's work involved not just mending tiers, but often reconstructing entire sections of an umbrella frame, a process demanding considerable skill and time. This level of dedication simply wasn't mirrored in the production of cheaper alternatives. The rise of department stores further exacerbated this trend. These establishments offered a dazzling array of new products, enticing consumers with novelty rather than longevity. While some patrons continued to seek out Marija's expertise, those who valued quality and understood the cost savings of repair over replacement, her clientele steadily diminished. It was a gradual erosion, not an abrupt collapse, but the direction of travel was undeniable. Traditional skills were becoming increasingly marginalized in a society prioritizing speed and affordability above all else. The shift towards mass production and readily available goods, as we've discussed, presented challenges for those who practiced traditional trades. Marija's skill in umbrella repair, a craft demanding time and precision, found itself increasingly at odds with this new emphasis on speed and affordability. But to truly understand the pressures she faced, it helps to consider the broader context of Victorian society, a world rigidly structured by class divisions. Britannia's account paints a picture of an era defined by these very hierarchies. The majority of people belonged to the working class, often enduring long hours for low wages. While conditions weren't static, there was some improvement in living standards. The gulf between those who labored and those who profited remained vast. Above them stood a growing middle class, striving for respectability and influence. And at the very top, controlling land and titles, resided the wealthy upper class. This wasn't just about income. It shaped every aspect of life, from education and leisure to even ideas about appropriate behavior. The Victorian era also saw distinct roles assigned based on gender. Men were expected to occupy the public sphere work and politics, while women were relegated to the private realm of home and family. Now, this ideal didn't always reflect reality. Working-class women often contributed significantly to their families' incomes out of necessity. But it nonetheless influenced expectations and opportunities. And for someone like Marija, a woman operating an independent trade, navigating these societal norms would have presented its own set of obstacles. The very notion of a skilled artisan challenging the prevailing economic trends was itself something of an anomaly within this carefully ordered system. This rigid structure permeated every facet of Victorian life, influencing even seemingly minor trades like umbrella repair. Marija's position as an independent artisan highlights this tension. A woman earning a living through skilled labor rather than domesticity was unusual, and likely drew both admiration and scrutiny. The expansion of the electorate mentioned earlier provides some context here. While initially limited to property-owning men, reforms gradually broadened participation, though women remained largely excluded from formal politics. This slow shift toward greater representation mirrored a broader questioning of established hierarchies, even if progress was incremental. The Industrial Revolution's impact extended beyond factory walls, reshaping the landscape for skilled tradespeople as well. While mass production brought cheaper goods to some, it also threatened traditional crafts. An umbrella repairer, reliant on quality materials and painstaking work, faced competition from factories churning out less durable wares. The Britannica notes that this period saw a rise in occupational diseases due to crowded working environments, something Marija would have understood all too well within her small workshop. This constant pressure to adapt or be left behind was a reality for many artisans throughout the Victorian era. The Britannica notes that by the Victorian era, Britain held significant global power as the world's largest empire. Yet, within this context of imperial strength and industrial progress, a quiet struggle unfolded in workshops like the one Marija knew so well. Following her father's death, the responsibility for maintaining umbrellas, their frames, fabrics, and mechanisms, fell to her, a path she hadn't anticipated. Marija hadn't sought this inheritance. Accounts suggest that many young women of the time were steered toward domesticity or factory work. Opportunities in skilled trades like umbrella repair were uncommon. The Britannica mentions that gender ideology dictated distinct roles for men and women, assigning them to separate spheres, one public, one private. While Marija's family workshop wasn't a factory, it was undeniably a place of labor, challenging those prescribed boundaries. What is clear is that this transition demanded an adjustment for Marija and the community who relied on her father's skill. The work itself was meticulous. A single umbrella could require dozens, replacing spokes, restitching linings, oiling joints. Each task required patience and precision. The Britannica describes a period marked by constant pressure to adapt or be left behind, and Marija's craft certainly faced that challenge from cheaper, mass-produced alternatives. Could she maintain her father's reputation for quality in an era of increasingly disposable goods? Marija's initial reluctance manifested as a slower pace, more questions than her father anticipated, and a certain hesitancy when advising customers. He, in turn, adapted his teaching style, recognizing that the direct approach he used with male apprentices wouldn't suit his daughter. Victorian society placed considerable emphasis on female modesty and deference. Marija's training needed to account for this expectation while still fostering her skill. She found a particular aptitude for the finer details, matching thread colors, ensuring linings were perfectly aligned, subtly reinforcing weakened fabric tasks, not easily quantifiable, but contributing significantly to an umbrella's longevity and appearance. Her father began assigning increasingly complex repairs, trusting her judgment even when it differed from his own. One account mentions a particularly intricate restoration of an antique silk parasol, a commission demanding both technical expertise and artistic. Victorian craftspeople often took pride in replicating original designs. Marija's success with the parasol seemed to mark a turning point, demonstrating skill and earning respect within the community who valued quality above all else. Perhaps this recognition, more than any formal instruction, began to chip away at her initial reservations and reveal a quiet satisfaction in her craft. The meticulous work of Marija's father, restoring umbrellas and parasols to their former glory, had initially felt like a constraint. A young woman with aspirations beyond the small workshop seemed an oddity in itself. Yet, as she observed him, absorbed his techniques, the careful selection of thread colors, ensuring linings were perfectly aligned, subtly reinforcing weakened fabric tasks, not easily quantifiable but contributing significantly to an umbrella's longevity and appearance. One account mentions a particularly intricate restoration of an antique silk parasol, a commission demanding both technical expertise and artistic sensitivity. The Victorian era itself presented a complex backdrop for women pursuing skilled trades. Britannica notes that society was structured around distinct gender roles. Men were expected in the public sphere, while women occupied the private. This ideal often clashed with reality, particularly for working-class families, where women's contributions to household income were essential. While Marija's family wasn't explicitly described as working class, it is reasonable to infer that economic realities shaped their circumstances. The idea was that a woman's sphere was the home, yet here she was, immersed in a craft traditionally associated with men. The expansion of the middle class during this period, a significant shift documented by Britannica, created new opportunities and challenges. While Victorian ideology emphasized women's supposed moral superiority and dependence, the growing middle class also saw some women seeking education and perhaps Marija's success with that parasol offered a glimpse into those possibilities, a chance to demonstrate skill and earn respect within a community that valued quality above all else. Yet, these societal expectations didn't entirely confine women's roles. While formal apprenticeships were largely unavailable to them, daughters and wives often assisted male relatives in workshops, a practice that provided valuable experience. Accounts suggest some women quietly honed their skills alongside men, contributing significantly without receiving formal recognition. The expansion of the middle class also brought a subtle shift. As families grew wealthier, they might employ young women not just for domestic duties, but to assist with small repairs or alterations, providing another avenue for skill development. It's difficult to quantify precisely how many women participated in this informal training, but it undoubtedly existed, a silent current running beneath the surface of Victorian craft traditions. The very structure of family businesses sometimes allowed for female involvement. A widowed mother might inherit and continue her husband's umbrella repair shop, providing for herself and children while maintaining a vital community service. The quiet persistence of craft traditions often fades with industrial progress, yet sometimes they resurface not as relics of a bygone era, but as vital expressions of cultural identity. This is particularly evident in modern Slovenia, where a renewed appreciation for traditional skills has taken hold. Consider the Victorian era itself. While Britain experienced rapid industrialization and economic expansion, it also witnessed a subtle shift within society, a growing middle class that sometimes valued handcrafted goods alongside mass-produced items. The very structure of family businesses occasionally allowed women to participate in these crafts, maintaining valuable skills across generations. This revival isn't simply about nostalgia. It's a deliberate effort to reconnect with Slovenia's heritage and build an economy rooted in local expertise. For centuries, Slovenian artisans honed their skills weaving textiles, carving wood, shaping metal, often passing down knowledge through families. The Industrial Revolution, as it did elsewhere, disrupted these traditional pathways. Factories offered cheaper goods, and younger generations often sought opportunities in burgeoning urban centers. Yet the desire to create something tangible, something imbued with personal skill and regional identity, never entirely disappeared. Now, a new generation. This isn't about rejecting modern technology or industry. Rather, it's about integrating traditional techniques into contemporary practices, a recognition that these skills represent more than just a means of making an object. They embody cultural memory and a connection to the land. And in this context, Marija La's umbrella repair business finds its place, not as an anomaly, but as part of a larger movement celebrating Slovenian craftsmanship. This broader appreciation for handcrafted items also reflects a growing awareness of the social and economic conditions that often accompanied industrial production. Reports detailing harsh working environments, long hours, and low wages within factories began to circulate more widely. Though it's important to note these accounts were sometimes sensationalized and prompted some individuals to seek alternatives rooted in smaller scale, more personalized labor. The rise of trade unions during this period further underscored the desire for fairer conditions and a greater sense of agency among workers. While mass production undeniably brought affordability within reach for many, it also sparked a countercurrent valuing the human element inherent in traditional crafts. This isn't to suggest that industrial goods were universally rejected. Rather, they coexisted alongside handcrafted items, each. The very act of choosing a hand-repaired umbrella, for instance, could represent more than simply functionality. It became an expression of values, a conscious decision to support local artisans and preserve cultural heritage. The rise of mass production, as we've explored, brought undeniable benefits, affordability, and accessibility for many. Yet alongside this embrace of industrial goods, a countercurrent began to flow, one valuing craftsmanship and personal connection. It's easy to imagine, then, that choosing a hand-repaired umbrella might have represented more than simple practicality. It could be an expression of values, a conscious decision to support local artisans and preserve cultural heritage. This shift wasn't solely about aesthetics, though. The Victorian era itself was a period of profound change, industrialization reshaping society, the British Empire expanding its reach across the globe. Britannica notes that this time, roughly spanning 1820 to 1914, saw Britain as the world's largest empire and a wealthy nation driven by rapid industrial growth. But such progress came at a cost. The factory system replaced traditional methods of production, often subjecting workers, including women and children, to harsh conditions for meager wages. This spurred the rise of trade unions, reflecting a desire for fairer treatment and agency among laborers. And it wasn't just about labor practices, there was a growing awareness of the broader environment as well. The Industrial Revolution, Britannica tells us, contributed to occupational diseases from crowded factories and exposure to new materials. While we might not use the term environmentalism in the modern sense, this recognition of harm, of the consequences of unchecked industrial activity, laid groundwork for later concerns. Think about it. If people are noticing the detrimental effects on their own health within a factory setting, is it so surprising that they would begin to question other impacts? Advertisements from Whitby, preserved in local records, offer glimpses into this era's consumer landscape. Businesses like Edmund Crane's Linen and Woolen Drapers routinely listed umbrellas among their wares, while Henry Duck announced a large display of new goods, including sunshades and umbrellas. W. Thornton even touted homemade umbrellas, suggesting a preference for locally crafted goods, perhaps as an alternative to mass-produced options. The advertisements offer more than just product listings, though. They reveal something about local preferences and economic activity. W. Thornton's repeated emphasis on homemade umbrellas, for instance, suggests a desire among some consumers to support local craftspeople. And while silk or cotton umbrellas were common, the materials themselves varied considerably depending on affordability and taste. The Whitby Museum's collection includes examples of particularly fine specimens, like one in brown silk brocade with a matching lining and ornamented ivory handle, a clear indication that even everyday items could be markers of status and refinement. Its metal cover bears a maker's mark, 28 Cheapside, Crawford, identifying a London firm established as early as 1829. How such an umbrella found its way to Whitby remains unknown, but it speaks to the interconnectedness of regional and national markets even in this. The umbrellas arriving at Crawford's workshop on Cheapside and subsequently finding their way to Whitby were more than just objects needing repair. They represented a connection to broader networks of trade and manufacture. But beyond their material value, these items held something deeper for the people who owned them, an emotional significance that speaks volumes about Victorian society. The era between roughly 1820 and 1914 was marked by a class-based structure and distinct gender roles. While industrialization brought wealth to some, it also meant many lived in challenging circumstances. Yet, even amidst those difficulties, there existed a strong sense of valuing what one possessed and extending its life through careful maintenance. To discard an item simply because it was damaged felt almost wasteful. Consider the implications. If something could be mended, should it not be? This wasn't merely about frugality. It reflected a broader cultural attitude towards preservation and resourcefulness. The very act of repair became imbued with meaning, a testament to one's respect for craftsmanship, a rejection of disposable consumerism that would become more prevalent later on. It was an acknowledgement of the labor invested in creating something initially, and a desire to honor that effort by keeping it functional. You might well imagine a mother showing her daughter how to carefully stitch a tear in a parasol lining, passing down not just a skill but also a value. This valuing of repair extended beyond umbrellas. Naturally, It permeated many aspects of Victorian life. Consider clothing. Mending a garment was far more common than replacing it. A skilled seamstress or tailor could transform worn fabrics into something new and useful, demonstrating ingenuity born from necessity. Even elaborate mourning attire, dictated by strict social conventions, would be altered and repurposed rather than discarded after the prescribed period of grief. The same principle applied to furniture. A damaged chair leg might be repaired with meticulous care, preserving an heirloom for future generations. And it wasn't solely about saving money, though that was certainly a factor for many. There existed a quiet pride in demonstrating one's ability to maintain and restore, a tangible expression of self-reliance. A well-repaired item spoke volumes about the owner's character. Resourcefulness and respect were qualities highly regarded within Victorian society. It also fostered a deeper connection to possessions, transforming them from mere commodities into objects imbued with personal history and meaning. One can imagine the quiet satisfaction derived not just from having an umbrella that still shielded from the rain, but knowing it had been brought back from disrepair through one's own efforts, or those of someone trusted. The meticulous care Marija La brought to each umbrella repair extended beyond mere functionality. It reflected an understanding of value that resonated within Victorian society. The notion of preserving and restoring, rather than discarding, was deeply ingrained, a demonstration of self-reliance and respect for resources. But how did this ethos translate into a viable business model? It wasn't simply about mending broken frames or replacing worn fabric. It involved a delicate balancing act between sustainability and profitability within a rapidly changing market. The Victorian era itself presented a unique economic landscape. Britain, as the world's largest empire, experienced unprecedented industrialization alongside a rigid class structure. While many toiled in harsh factory conditions for meager wages, a growing middle class sought goods that reflected their aspirations, items demonstrating quality and longevity. This created an opportunity for Marija. Rather than competing with mass-produced umbrellas, she carved out a niche repairing them, extending their lifespan and offering a service unavailable from factories focused on volume. Her approach wasn't about lavish embellishment or novelty. Instead, it centered on the efficient use of materials. A discarded umbrella might yield fabric for another's lining, its ribs repurposed into handles, minimizing waste and reducing costs. This resourceful practice aligned with Victorian values that emphasized thrift and practicality, while simultaneously allowing her to offer competitive pricing. It's a question, isn't it? How does one reconcile the desire for economic success with a commitment to responsible resource management? Maria's business model suggested an answer, by recognizing inherent value in what others considered refuse. This emphasis on longevity also subtly shifted consumer expectations. Rather than discarding items at the first sign of wear, individuals began to value skilled repair, a service Marija was uniquely positioned to provide. The very nature of Victorian society, with its rigid class structure and evolving economic landscape, contributed to her success. While the burgeoning middle class desired quality goods, even they were mindful of cost. A repaired umbrella, costing significantly less than a new one, represented both practicality and a degree. And what about those further down the scale? For many working families, an affordable repair was simply essential for maintaining household necessities. The availability of materials also played a crucial role. As Britain's industrial processes generated ever-increasing volumes of waste scraps of fabric, discarded metal components, Marija found herself with a readily accessible supply chain. This wasn't merely about cost reduction. It was an inherent aspect of her business model, aligning directly with the Victorian ethos of resourcefulness. It is worth noting that this resourceful approach also minimized her reliance on external suppliers, granting her greater control over pricing and production, a significant advantage in a market. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, witnessed remarkable shifts in industry, politics, and even how people perceived everyday objects. We've been discussing Marija's umbrella repair business, a small but vital thread in the larger tapestry of this period, and it's worth considering just how commonplace umbrellas became and how they were presented to the public. Advertising played an increasingly significant role during these decades. While we often picture grand billboards or elaborate posters, many businesses relied on smaller-scale methods, advertising cards. These weren't simply announcements, they were carefully crafted pieces.
Think of them as miniature portraits of aspiration, subtly encouraging purchases. In Whitby, a coastal town within the United Kingdom, local drapers like Edmund Crane and Henry Duck routinely advertised their wares in the Whitby Gazette. These weren't just lists of goods, they were carefully constructed invitations to spend. One advertisement from 1870 vividly declared a large display of new goods: crinolines, sunshades, umbrellas. Notice how umbrellas are grouped alongside fashionable attire and accessories. Another firm, W. Thornton, explicitly urged potential customers to prepare for a rainy day, homemade umbrellas. It's a practical message, certainly, but also an implicit suggestion. Be prepared. These cards often showcased the variety of available silk or cotton umbrellas depending on one's means, and frequently highlighted repair services too. Lambert and Waters of Manchester House even advertised new jackets, capes, dresses, skirts, corsets, umbrellas, a comprehensive list designed to entice shoppers with the promise of renewal. It's interesting how these cards weren't just about selling an umbrella, they were about selling a lifestyle, a sense of preparedness and style. The longevity of an umbrella also influenced its presence within collections like that at Whitby Museum. Unlike parasols, which often succumbed to fleeting fashion trends, umbrellas were frequently used until they simply wore out, making them less likely candidates for donation. 3 examples held there can be identified as umbrellas, 2 dating from the late Victorian period and 1 Edwardian. These later models showcase unbleached cotton with open-work machine embroidery, a detail suggesting a shift in aesthetic preferences towards lighter, more decorative designs. 2 of the earlier specimens are crafted from brown silk, one particularly noteworthy for its use of silk brocade, both on the exterior and as lining, paired with an elaborately ornamented ivory handle and matching top. A stamped marking on the metal cover, 28 Cheapside Crawford, reveals the London-based manufacturer Crawford, who had already established a presence by 1829. The precise route this particular umbrella took to Whitby remains unknown, but it speaks to the interconnectedness of commerce across the United Kingdom. The umbrellas recovered from Marija La's workshop offer a glimpse into a world of meticulous repair, but also hint at something broader, the enduring significance of family businesses within Slovenian society. It's easy to overlook these small enterprises in accounts of industrial progress and grand narratives of nation-building, yet they formed a vital backbone for communities across Slovenia, as they did throughout much of Europe during the Victorian era. The Britannica notes that Britain itself was marked by a class-based society and rapid industrialization. This shaped both economic realities and social structures. While we're focusing on Whitby, England, it's important to remember that similar dynamics played out across the United Kingdom, and indeed in many parts of Europe during this period. Family businesses provided stability and continuity within a rapidly changing world. They were often passed down through generations, carrying with them not just skills but also values and traditions. The Victorian era saw Britain as a dominant global empire, and that reach extended to the way goods, like umbrellas, moved across borders and influenced local economies. Marija La's own story exemplifies this continuity. Her workshop wasn't simply a place of trade, it was a repository of knowledge, a living testament to her family's craft. The skills required for umbrella repair, the careful stitching, the precise adjustment of frames were honed over years, often decades, and passed down from parent to child. This isn't unique to Slovenia, of course. Across Britain and beyond,
These kinds of businesses served as anchors within communities, offering not just goods or services, but also a sense of familiarity and trust. This interconnectedness extended beyond trade routes, influencing social structures and cultural exchange across vast distances. The Britannica notes that Britain's imperial holdings shaped both its economy and its politics, a reality felt keenly even within communities like Whitby. Consider, for instance, how goods from India, textiles, spices, tea, found their way into Victorian homes, impacting local tastes and industries. And it wasn't simply about the flow of commodities. People moved too, creating diasporic communities that blended traditions and perspectives. The very fabric of British society was being woven with threads drawn from across its empire. This global reach also meant that events far beyond Whitby's harbour, political upheavals in India, economic shifts in China, could ripple outwards, affecting the demand for umbrellas or the price of raw materials. It's a reminder that even seemingly localized businesses like Marija Lars were embedded within a much larger and complex world system. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, was a period of immense change for Britain. It coincided with Queen Victoria's reign and saw the nation solidify its position as a global power, an empire stretching across continents. We've already considered how this reach impacted even local businesses like Marija Lars' umbrella repair shop in Whitby. But beyond trade routes and raw materials, another current flowed: ideas. And some of those currents took shape within organizations dedicated to social reform. One such group was the Fabian Society, founded in 1884. It wasn't a political party seeking immediate power. Instead, it focused on disseminating what they considered progressive policies through pamphlets and tracts. These weren't fiery manifestos designed to incite revolution. Rather, they were carefully reasoned arguments intended to slowly shift public opinion, a gradual infiltration of. Think of them as seeds planted with the expectation of patient growth. The Society's approach was deliberate, what they termed permeation. They believed that lasting change wasn't achieved through dramatic upheaval, but through quiet influence. Their tracts covered a wide range of topics, from land reform to women's suffrage, always presented within an argument for incremental progress. One might ask, why this measured pace? Perhaps the Fabians recognized the entrenched nature of Victorian society and understood that radical proposals would be swiftly dismissed. Or maybe they simply believed in the power of reasoned debate over revolutionary fervor. Whatever their reasoning, these tracts offer a fascinating window into the intellectual currents shaping Victorian Britain and, surprisingly, resonate with some modern concerns about sustainability. But what did these tracts actually say? One common theme was land reform, arguing for fairer distribution and tenant rights, a direct challenge to the entrenched power of large landowners. Others addressed appalling urban living conditions, advocating for improved sanitation and housing, recognizing that disease spread rapidly in overcrowded slums. The Society also championed women's suffrage, believing that extending voting rights would bring greater social justice and broader perspective. These weren't radical calls for immediate change, mind you. They were carefully worded proposals designed to be palatable to a wider audience. One tract might suggest incremental reforms to property laws, another proposed pilot programs for improved sanitation in specific districts. The goal was not to overthrow the existing order, but to nudge it gradually towards what they considered a more equitable and sustainable society. And while their focus on gradualism might seem frustratingly slow by today's standards, consider the context. Victorian Britain was deeply resistant to change, particularly when that change threatened established hierarchies. The rain, of course, was a constant companion for those living in Victorian Britain. And while it might seem straightforward, simply unpleasant weather, its impact on daily life extended far beyond damp clothes and muddy streets. It shaped architecture, influenced fashion, and even played a small part in social interactions. One item, more than any other, became synonymous with navigating this perpetually drizzly landscape: the umbrella. Before the Victorian era, umbrellas were rare curiosities. They'd existed for centuries, certainly. Originating in Asia, they arrived in Europe as elaborate sunshades used by nobility.
But their practicality hadn't quite caught on. In England particularly, men considered carrying an umbrella rather effeminate. It was seen as something women did to protect themselves from the sun. Then came Jonas Hanway, a philanthropist and traveller. He began using an umbrella regularly in London during the 1750s and faced considerable ridicule for his efforts. Imagine being openly mocked just for trying to stay dry. Yet, his persistence gradually chipped away at the social stigma. By the Victorian period, attitudes had shifted considerably. The rise of industrialization brought with it new manufacturing techniques that made umbrellas more affordable. Suddenly, they weren't solely the preserve of the wealthy. They became a commonplace item for both men and women navigating the crowded streets of London and other urban centers. An umbrella wasn't just about keeping dry, it was also an indicator of social standing. The quality of the fabric, the craftsmanship of the handle, all spoke volumes about one's position in society. Think of it as a subtle form of non-verbal communication, a quiet signal to those around you.
And while they offered protection from rain, umbrellas could also serve as shields, both literal and figurative, allowing individuals to maintain a degree of privacy within the bustling public spaces of Victorian cities. The increasing affordability of umbrellas also spurred innovation in their design and construction. Early Victorian umbrellas were often quite cumbersome, with heavy wooden or whalebone frames and thick, unwieldy fabric coverings. But as manufacturing techniques improved, particularly in metalworking, lighter and more durable frames became possible. William Sangster, writing later in the century, noted how these advancements transformed the umbrella from a rather awkward necessity into something. He recounts anecdotes of early adopters struggling with their cumbersome umbrellas on crowded streets, quite unlike the streamlined designs that would become commonplace. The development of stronger fabrics, cotton duck, and eventually waterproofed silk also contributed to this evolution, allowing for more tightly stretched coverings that resisted rain better and looked considerably neater. And as demand grew, so too did specialization within the umbrella repair trade. A craftsman might focus solely on handle carving or frame construction, further refining those skills. The evolution of umbrellas led to specialization within the repair trade, and among those skilled hands was Marija La, whose small shop on a bustling London street quietly served her community. It's easy to overlook such businesses in an era defined by industrial might and imperial ambition, but consider this. For every new umbrella sold, several others required mending. Marija's work wasn't glamorous, it was meticulous and repetitive, often performed amidst dust and the faint scent of oiled silk. A broken spoke needed resecuring, a torn lining painstakingly patched, handles replaced or recarved. Each repair extended an object's life, contributing to a cycle distinct from the burgeoning consumerism of the Victorian era. The Britannica notes that while Britain experienced rapid growth and industrialization, living conditions varied significantly across social strata. And for many, particularly those in the working class, extending the lifespan of possessions was not merely practical, it was essential. Marija's influence wasn't about grand pronouncements or sweeping reforms. It resided instead in the quiet act of restoration, a tangible demonstration of resourcefulness and resilience within a society increasingly defined by its inequalities. The expansion of the electorate during this period is often highlighted, but what about those whose voices weren't heard through formal politics? Perhaps Marija's small business offered another form of agency, a place where skill was valued regardless of class or gender. Beyond providing a service, her repairs represented an act of conservation, a quiet rebellion against the relentless cycle of production and disposal that increasingly defined Victorian life. The sheer volume of goods manufactured during this era is staggering. Factories churned out textiles, clothing, household items, all designed with varying degrees of durability.
While some embraced this new abundance, others recognized its inherent unsustainability. The Britannica notes a growing awareness of public health concerns linked to industrial waste and pollution. Though Maresia's work didn't directly address these large-scale issues, it offered a localized counterpoint. Each mended umbrella represented a small reduction in the demand for raw materials: silk, cotton, wood, metal, all extracted from somewhere else and processed through energy-intensive systems. Consider the resources needed to fell a tree for a handle, or cultivate the mulberry leaves that fed the silkworms producing the fabric. Maresia's repairs lessened the need for such interventions, however marginally. It's difficult to quantify her impact precisely. Records of umbrella repair businesses are scarce, but it is reasonable to suggest that countless objects were diverted from disposal and reused, thanks to individuals like her. The Victorian era itself spanned roughly 1820 to 1914, a period marked by class-based society and the growth of the state and economy. Britain held significant global power during this time, though living conditions varied greatly. And while formal politics often excluded many voices, Maresia's quiet work offered a different kind of contribution, a testament to skill and resilience in an age of rapid change. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, was a period of immense change for Britain. It coincided with Queen Victoria's reign and saw the nation rise as a dominant global power, a position underpinned by significant industrialization and an expanding empire. But what did people know about these changes at the time? How were they communicated, debated, and understood? Much of that understanding came through newspapers. Newspapers during this period weren't quite like those we know today. They served as a vital conduit for information news of industry, labor disputes, social shifts, all shaping public opinion, and the sheer volume of printed material increased dramatically throughout the era. It wasn't just about reporting events, but also framing them within a broader societal context. Consider that while Britain held significant global power, living conditions varied greatly across social strata. Newspapers reflected and often amplified these disparities. For instance, articles detailed the rapid growth fueled by industrialization, noting how factories replaced traditional domestic production. This shift brought unprecedented wealth to some, but also harsh realities for many workers. Long hours, dangerous conditions, and low wages were commonplace. Reports on factory life weren't always flattering. They highlighted the precarious. And it wasn't just about describing these conditions. Newspapers often became platforms for advocating reform, fueling the rise of trade unions in the mid-19th century. Was this a period of unmitigated progress? The newspapers suggested otherwise, presenting a more complex picture than perhaps we might initially assume. The expansion of suffrage, for instance, didn't occur uniformly. Milestones like the Reform Acts gradually broadened participation, but left many disenfranchised for considerable periods. This evolving political landscape was mirrored in the newspapers themselves. Their readership grew alongside the electorate, and their content shifted to reflect these changing Reports detailing parliamentary debates weren't simply dry summaries of proceedings. They offered glimpses into the anxieties and aspirations of a nation grappling with its own identity. Consider, too, how news from across the empire was presented, often filtered through a lens that emphasized British dominance while simultaneously acknowledging the complexities of colonial administration. These accounts frequently touched upon issues like famine relief in Ireland or unrest amongst Indian labourers, events that underscored both Britain's power and its responsibilities on a global scale. The newspapers weren't always comfortable spaces either. Debates about social reform could be fierce. The Victorian era was a period of profound change, industrialization reshaping lives, an expanding electorate demanding to be heard, and a vast empire stretching across the globe. Within this whirlwind of progress, quieter shifts also occurred, changes in how everyday objects were perceived and maintained. Consider the humble umbrella, once a symbol of status, now increasingly commonplace.
As mass production made them more accessible, their lifespan shortened too. And with that shortening came an inevitable question: what becomes of these discarded items? Industrialization brought wealth to Britain, but also
Umbrellas were not investments meant to last generations, but rather consumer goods subject to wear and tear. This rapid turnover fueled a demand for repair, initially met by skilled artisansmen who understood timber, silk, and whalebone. As the century progressed, however, a new challenge arose: how to reconcile this disposable culture with an increasing awareness of its consequences. Victorian society's structure, class and gender roles influenced attitudes toward consumption and waste. While upper classes might have valued longevity in possessions, the burgeoning middle class embraced novelty, and even working-class families participated in the. Yet, alongside consumerism, emerged a desire to make do and mend, a value born from necessity, but also fueled by a nascent environmental consciousness. Could these seemingly contradictory impulses, the drive for newness and thrift, shape the future of umbrella repair? This growing concern hinted at an unexpected path forward. Perhaps not a complete return to meticulous repairs, given the scale of production, but a reimagining of the umbrella's life cycle. One might envision smaller workshops focusing on bespoke repairs and alterations, catering to clients who appreciated quality and sustainability over fleeting trends. These establishments could offer courses in basic repair techniques, empowering individuals to extend their umbrella's lives, fostering connection to craft and resourcefulness. It's also conceivable that manufacturers would incorporate more durable materials, perhaps revisiting traditional timber framing or experimenting with readily repairable fabrics, rather than prioritizing cheapness above all else. Such shifts wouldn't necessarily be driven by altruism. A reputation for longevity could become a marketable advantage in an increasingly discerning consumer landscape. The challenge, of course, lay in balancing these aspirations with the economic pressures that had already shaped the industry so profoundly. Could quality truly thrive within a. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, was a period of immense change. A time when Britain held considerable global power and experienced rapid industrialization. It's easy to picture this as an age of grand estates and sweeping reforms, but the realities for many were far more complex, shaped by a rigid class system and distinct gender roles. While some Victorians debated ideas openly, others adhered to strict social codes, a duality that permeated nearly every aspect of life. Consider the world of work during this time. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally reshaped how people lived and earned their living. Factories replaced traditional workshops, leading to long hours and often harsh conditions for many workers. Yet, alongside these challenges, a growing middle class emerged, seeking both economic advancement and moral leadership. And within that landscape, nestled amongst the larger industrial shifts, were smaller establishments like those where umbrellas were repaired, offering a connection to craft and a sense of individual agency. These weren't simply places for fixing broken spokes or replacing worn fabric. They represented an appreciation for quality and sustainability in a world increasingly driven by mass production. Advertisements from Whitby, a coastal town within the United Kingdom, reveal that businesses like Edmund Crane's Linen and Woolen Drapers routinely offered umbrellas alongside clothing and textiles. Henry Duck's drapery shop also prominently displayed umbrellas amongst its wares, and W. Thornton emphasized homemade umbrellas, suggesting a local craftsmanship valued by some customers. These establishments weren't just selling an item, they were offering a service, a repair, a recovering that extended the life of something already owned. It's a far cry from today's throwaway culture, isn't it? These advertisements offer glimpses into not just what was being sold. For instance, W. Thornton's emphasis on homemade umbrellas suggests a deliberate appeal to customers who valued local craftsmanship and perhaps sought an alternative to mass-produced goods.
The very act of repairing umbrellas, recovering them with new fabric or mending broken frames, speaks volumes about attitudes toward consumption and waste. It wasn't simply about replacing something when it failed, it was about extending its usefulness, a practice that resonates differently than our modern inclination towards disposability. Indeed, the Whitby Museum's collection reveals some surviving examples from the late Victorian period, including one particularly fine umbrella crafted with silk brocade and an ornate ivory.
The presence of a London manufacturer's mark on this item, 28 Cheapside, Crawford, hints at connections between coastal towns like Whitby and larger industrial centres. How did such an object find its way into a local collection? We can only speculate, but it underscores the interconnectedness of commerce across the United Kingdom. The umbrella, as Marie Jalard knew it, was changing. Not necessarily better, but different. The Whitby Museum's collection holds examples of earlier craftsmanship, silk brocade, ornate ivory handles, objects that speak to a time when an umbrella wasn't just protection from the rain, it was a statement. But increasingly those statements were being made elsewhere, and at prices Marija couldn't compete with. The Victorian era itself was defined by rapid change industrialization, transforming Britain into a global power, expanding suffrage, and a growing economy. This touched everything, even the humble umbrella. The rise of factories meant mass production, inevitably impacting artisans like Marija. Suddenly, umbrellas weren't unique creations painstakingly assembled by hand, but commodities churned out in greater numbers, often at a lower cost. The shift wasn't immediate. There was still demand for quality repairs, a broken spoke here, a restitched canopy there. But the very idea of what an umbrella should be seemed to change. People were less inclined to mend and maintain. Disposability began to creep into attitudes toward possessions. A generation accustomed to readily available replacements found the patience for careful repair dwindling. It's easy to imagine a customer faced with Marija's honest assessment. The frame is weakened, but I can reinforce it. It will cost you 3 shillings, simply walking away and buying a new one from a shopkeeper down the street. It wasn't solely about cheaper goods. What people valued seemed to be shifting. Marija had always prided herself on the durability of her work. A well-repaired umbrella could last for decades with proper care. But that expectation was fading as customers increasingly sought replacements, prioritizing novelty and fleeting fashion over longevity. A new style might appear, an elaborate handle or an unusual fabric, and suddenly Marija's sturdy, reliable umbrellas felt outdated. The evidence of this wasn't always explicit. It came in the form of casual comments, a dismissive glance at her display, or simply the lack of repeat customers. The expansion of suffrage also played a role. As more men gained the right to vote and participate in public life, though women remained largely excluded from such opportunities, a broader range of voices began to shape consumer tastes. Mass-produced goods were often marketed with an appeal that transcended class lines, promising accessibility and modernity. Even those who appreciated craftsmanship might be swayed by clever advertising or the allure of a bargain. And while Marija's repairs offered a tangible benefit, a functional umbrella restored the promise of something new often proved more compelling. The shift towards mass production and the accompanying changes in consumer habits rippled through even seemingly small corners of Marija's repair shop felt outdated. And this wasn't always explicit. It came in the form of casual comments, a dismissive glance at her display, or simply the lack of repeat customers. But alongside these shifts arose public debate, a questioning of progress itself. The period between 1820 and 1914 saw Britain transform into what was then the world's largest empire, experiencing rapid growth and industrialization. Yet, this prosperity wasn't universally felt. The factory system replaced domestic production, leading to long hours, dangerous conditions, and low wages for many workers, including women and children. This stark contrast between immense wealth and widespread hardship fueled a rising tide of social commentary. How could a nation boast of progress while so much suffering persisted? The expansion of suffrage also played a role. As more men gained the right to vote and participate in public life, a broader range of voices began to shape discussions about society's direction. These conversations weren't confined to Parliament. They appeared in newspapers, pamphlets, and even within everyday conversation. The very idea of what constituted improvement was being re-examined. Was it simply the accumulation of wealth? Or did it encompass something more, a fairer distribution of resources, better working conditions, perhaps even an appreciation for craftsmanship? And that's where someone like Marija and her trade in umbrella repair found herself caught within this larger debate. The rise of mass-produced umbrellas offered affordability and novelty, promises that resonated with many. Even those who valued the skill involved in a well-made item might be swayed by clever advertising or the allure of a bargain. The allure of mass production wasn't solely about cost, though that certainly played a role. It also represented a shift away from bespoke craftsmanship and towards standardized goods, readily available to a wider population. This change resonated with some segments of society, eager for newness and convenience. Yet it simultaneously sparked anxieties among those who valued traditional skills. Concerns arose regarding the potential displacement of artisans like Marija, whose livelihood depended on the meticulous repair and maintenance of individual umbrellas. Were these concerns merely nostalgic sentimentality? Perhaps. But they also reflected a deeper unease about the erosion of specialized knowledge and the devaluing of human skill in an increasingly mechanized world. Newspapers began to feature articles debating the merits of factory-made goods versus handcrafted items, often highlighting the perceived decline in quality associated with mass production. Some writers championed the virtues of supporting local tradespeople, arguing that it fostered community resilience and preserved valuable skills, a sentiment undoubtedly familiar to Marija herself. The rise of mass production brought anxieties to Victorian life, and concerns arose regarding artisans like Marija, whose livelihood depended on repairing umbrellas. Were these worries merely nostalgia? Perhaps. But they also reflected a deeper unease about specialized knowledge and human skill in an increasingly mechanized world. Newspapers debated factory-made goods versus handcrafted items, often highlighting quality concerns, a sentiment undoubtedly familiar to Marija herself. Marija's small shop on Flowergate wasn't just for repairs, it was a gathering point. Advertisements in the Whitby Gazette from businesses like Edmund Crane's Linen and Woolen Drapers, Henry Duck's Drapery, and W. Thornton's regularly mentioned umbrellas alongside clothing, demonstrating their everyday importance. These establishments often highlighted home-made umbrellas, suggesting a preference for locally crafted goods. And Marija, with her skill in recovering and repairing them, became an anchor within that local. She knew the families who relied on sturdy umbrellas to navigate Whitby's unpredictable weather. A wealthy merchant might bring in a silk brocade umbrella with an ivory handle, a testament to their status, while a working woman would arrive with a simpler cotton one, worn thin from years of service. Marija didn't just fix the fabric or ribs, she listened to their stories and occasionally shared news gleaned from her customers. It was through these interactions that information flowed about job opportunities, local events, even illnesses circulating within the community. A simple repair could spark a conversation, leading to unexpected connections. The advertisements themselves offer glimpses into evolving tastes. While silk remained desirable for those who could afford it, as evidenced by Marija's repair of a fine example with an ivory handle, simpler cotton umbrellas were commonplace. Crawford & Co., London manufacturers, are mentioned on one Whitby umbrella. They had been established since 1829 and appeared in journals of invention. It's difficult to know precisely how such items arrived in Whitby, but it speaks to a network of trade extending beyond the immediate locale. The local shops, Crane's, Duck's, Thornton's, served as intermediaries,
connecting residents with goods produced elsewhere while also promoting the work of local artisans. Unlike parasols, which often followed fleeting fashion trends, umbrellas were frequently repaired and reused until they simply wore out. Fewer ended up in collections like those at Whitby Museum. The umbrellas we've been examining, those repaired by Marija, often arrived from London manufacturers like Crawford & Co., a firm established as early as 1829. It's intriguing to consider how these items made their way to Whitby, a network of trade certainly extended beyond the immediate locale.
Local shops Cranes, Ducks, Thorntons served as vital intermediaries in this process, promoting both outside products and the work of local artisans. But unlike parasols, which often succumbed to fleeting fashion trends, umbrellas were frequently repaired and reused until they simply wore out. Fewer ended up in collections like those at Whitby Museum. This speaks to a certain practicality, doesn't it? A desire to make something last, rather than discarding it for the latest style. Advertisements in the Whitby Gazette reveal just how commonplace umbrellas were. Edmund Crane's Linen and Woolen Drapers, one of the larger local firms, regularly listed them among. Henry Duck, at his drapery on Flowergate, announced a large display of new goods, including umbrellas in 1870. And W. Thornton's at the Old Marketplace frequently touted homemade umbrellas, even offering to repair or recover them, a service that highlights a different kind of value placed on these items. One wonders, though, what drove this emphasis on durability. Was it purely economic necessity, or something more about a Victorian sensibility towards wastefulness? Lambert and Waters, based in Manchester House, Fishburn Park, advertised new goods including umbrellas as late as 1893, demonstrating the continued demand for these protective coverings.
And within Whitby Museum's costume collection are a few examples of umbrellas from before 1914, though fewer than parasols, perhaps reflecting that longer lifespan we've already touched upon. One particularly expensive specimen, marked with Crawford & Co.'s address at Cheapside in London, boasts a silk brocade exterior and an elaborate ivory handle, a testament to the quality and craftsmanship of the time. The Crawford & Co. umbrella's London mark suggests wider trade networks at play, even within a relatively isolated town like Whitby. Advertisements elsewhere reveal similar patterns, for instance, W.J.
Bennett of Scarborough frequently listed umbrellas in his drapery stock from the late 1860s onward. These establishments often catered to both local needs and visitors drawn by the coast's appeal. The durability prized within Whitby, the willingness to repair or recover rather than discard, seems echoed across this wider region too. While parasols appear more frequently in museum collections, perhaps owing to their greater susceptibility to fashion trends, umbrellas served a practical purpose that extended beyond mere style. One might even speculate that the relative scarcity of older examples reflects not simply neglect, but a testament to their enduring usefulness. An umbrella well maintained could last for years, outliving its initial purchase price many times over. The enduring usefulness of an umbrella, as we've seen reflected in Whitby's repair culture, finds a parallel far from the English coast in modern Slovenia. While Victorian England grappled with industrialization and social change, a similar appreciation for craft and resourcefulness persists today, most notably within the work of Marija La. She is an umbrella repairer based near Ljubljana, Slovenia's capital. La's workshop isn't simply a place to mend broken frames or replace worn fabric. It represents something larger, a conscious effort to reconcile traditional skills with contemporary concerns about sustainability. Consider this. In a world increasingly driven by disposable goods and rapid consumption, La actively champions the longevity of an object often treated as fleeting fashion. She repairs umbrellas that might otherwise be discarded, breathing new life into them. It's a practice rooted not just in practicality, but also in a quiet resistance to obsolescence, a sentiment perhaps familiar from those Whitby residents who favored recovering over replacement. The principles guiding La's work resonate with broader trends within Slovenia itself.
The nation has increasingly embraced artisanal production and sustainable practices, recognizing the value of preserving traditional skills while minimizing environmental impact. This isn't a sudden shift. It reflects a long history of resourcefulness born from necessity, a characteristic often found in societies that have faced economic hardship or limited access to resources. You might wonder, how does this manifest? It appears in everything from beekeeping and honey production to the revival of traditional weaving techniques. And within this context, Marija La's umbrella repair shop becomes a small but significant symbol, a tangible.
This broader embrace of traditional skills isn't solely an aesthetic preference, though that certainly plays a role. It also reflects a pragmatic response to economic shifts within Slovenia itself. Following periods of industrialization and modernization processes not unfamiliar to those who witness changes in Whitby, many Slovenians have sought to reconnect with their heritage and find alternative avenues for livelihood. La's workshop, like other artisanal businesses across the country, benefits from this renewed interest in locally sourced materials and handcrafted goods. It's a reaction, perhaps, against mass-produced items that lack both durability and connection to place. The emphasis on repair over replacement also aligns with broader European efforts towards circular economies, systems designed to minimize waste and maximize resource utilization. While the concept of circularity is relatively new terminology, the underlying principles are deeply ingrained in Slovenian culture. Resourcefulness has always been a necessity. It's born from historical circumstances where access to imported goods was often limited or unreliable. This fostered an environment where mending and repurposing were not merely economical choices, but essential practices, a mindset that continues to inform contemporary attitudes toward consumption and sustainability. The Victorian era, spanning roughly from 1820 to 1914, witnessed a profound shift in how people interacted with goods, a change that resonates even today. Consider the umbrella repairer. His trade existed within this burgeoning consumer culture, illuminating both his skill and broader societal values of the time. Britain's rise as a global power, fueled by industrialization and imperial expansion, created wealth though unevenly distributed. A rigid class system dictated much of life, with a growing middle class eager to demonstrate status through consumption. The Victorian stereotype often paints a picture of prudishness, but beneath that surface lay complex desires and anxieties about. Discussions about sex occurred, sometimes veiled in warnings, while strict social codes assigned distinct roles to men and women, a notion shaping purchasing habits. Rapid industrialization drove this consumer boom. Factories replaced workshops, creating goods at unprecedented rates, and Britain's empire expanded access to raw materials. Yet, alongside abundance came awareness of inequalities. While some enjoyed lavish lifestyles, many working-class families struggled. Even so, living standards gradually improved enough for families to afford basic necessities and occasional luxuries. This expanding middle class cultivated tastes and shaped what it meant to be respectable. Growing literacy rates fueled by compulsory education, acts also expanded the reach of political messaging, increasingly taking the form of advertising. While shop signs existed previously, the Victorian era saw a boom in professionally designed advertisements appearing in newspapers, on posters, and as leaflets. These weren't simply announcements, they were narratives intended to shape desires and associate products with values. A tonic might be presented alongside an image of robust health. Even the humble umbrella repairer's shop could benefit from this trend. The visual language itself evolved. Early advertisements were text-heavy and formal, gradually incorporating illustrations and eventually photography as printing technology improved. This wasn't just about selling goods. It was constructing a vision of what it meant to live a respectable life within Victorian society. Life during the era was shaped by class and gender. Men occupied the public realm of work and politics, while women were largely confined to the home, though economic realities often required working-class women to contribute to family income. Most Victorians were Christian, alongside advancements in science like Darwin's theory of evolution. The formal political system involved a constitutional monarchy dominated by aristocratic men, with an expanding electorate,
voting rights extended gradually to include more middle and working class men. Political conflicts included Irish nationalism and women's rights activism, leading to changes such as the Married Women's Property Acts. Britain also controlled a vast empire, shaping both itself and its colonies in complex ways. The tools of his trade, shears, pliers, needles and thread, lay across his workbench, familiar companions. He'd arranged them just so, within easy reach for the next repair.
It's striking, isn't it, how much care went into something seemingly commonplace. An umbrella. A shield against the rain, yes, but also an object reflecting its owner's taste and circumstance. Nearing the end of his days, he reflected on that role, not just as a craftsman, but as someone who helped sustain objects, perhaps even a certain ethos. The Victorian era valued durability. Things were made to last, even if they weren't always comfortable or convenient. This contrasted sharply with later consumerism. A broken umbrella wasn't discarded. It was brought in for repair. Wastefulness felt almost wrong. He remembered umbrellas passed down through generations, each mend adding to their history. The materials themselves spoke of this intention. Sturdy ribs of wood and steel, tightly woven fabric, silk or cotton, far removed from today's flimsy plastics. His skill came into play, reinforcing, preserving something valuable. The rise of industrialization did challenge that mindset. Mass production offered cheaper alternatives. A culture of disposability began to take root. Yet, appreciation for craftsmanship persisted. The skill and patience required to mend what already existed. Wasn't it more economical? Perhaps. But there was also a sense of responsibility, a connection to the past, an understanding that true value lay in enduring quality. It's tempting to view this as mere practicality, one less item contributing to waste. Yet pride was involved too, in the longevity of an object and the skill required to maintain it. This appreciation extended beyond umbrellas, permeating many aspects of Victorian life. Britain became the world's first industrialized nation during this period, but alongside unprecedented wealth came harsh realities for many workers. While mass production offered cheaper alternatives, a quiet resistance persisted. A desire for goods built to last and the expertise to keep them so. Formal politics was dominated by aristocratic men, yet local politics remained important, and those denied a voice still found ways to express their opinions. The structure of government itself reflected this tension between tradition and change. While formal politics was dominated by aristocratic men, local politics remained important, and those denied a voice still found ways to express their opinions.